So the acronym VICTAR stands for volume of data, impact of any data breach, the category of data, the threat to that data, and the company's appetite to risk. So Steve, using our VICTAR acronym, would you be able to elaborate on what the requirements of a DAL rating is?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just put context into it. So the law talks about appropriate technical and organisational measures. So what the law is trying to imply there is that everybody is different. So as a service provider for data protection services, you have to acknowledge that your customers have different requirements. Otherwise, you're treating everybody the same, which clearly isn't correct. So what we did with the DIAL rating, and to use your acronym of VICTAR, is that we created 5 key areas where your customers would need to answer questions, and that would determine a level which would enable you to dovetail your service to match that particular level for each customer. The first is the volume of data, which makes sense because higher volume is higher risk. Simple as that, really. Next, we look at the impact of data. So what would happen if they had a data breach? And that will change company to company. And a good example is if I'm an organisation that perhaps is in a questionable practice or a perceived questionable practice, if I suffer a data breach, the press may use that data breach just to put me in a negative headline. You get the idea. A salacious press headline is perhaps the biggest example of impact on a business for that. Then we're looking at the categories of data. So the law talks about different categories of data, but what we've also done is that we've included a higher level of categories. So you have personal data, special category data, but then we have corporate secrets. We think a lot of organisations would perhaps prefer to maintain their corporate secrets as private than they would potentially, which is controversial, personal data of their employees, for example. We then go on and we talk about threat. It's really important this because if you're talking about risk and you're talking about risk treatments, what level of risk treatment would be acceptable? Well, that will determine on who your threat adversary is. And so organisations are asked to see if they can identify a threat adversary category, and that could be opportunist, it could be organised crime, it could be foreign intelligence services, each with different levels of sophisticated types of attack they may mount to seek access to the physical device and the data on that device. And that will determine different controls like physical barriers or even asset management. We then look at what the appetite for risk is within a business. Now, I think this is a bit of a misnomer because I think risk and budget are tied together. Because most organisations will say that we have actually a very, very low tolerance for risk. But if they then say they don't have any budget, the two don't really match. So there's got to be a little bit of pragmatism going on here when you start talking about risk, because it is directly lined up to budget. I don't believe many people will say that they have a high tolerance for risk because they probably won't be in a job. We believe at ADISA that most businesses, being pragmatic, will come in the mid-level where that's concerned. Now, where all those questions sit, it sounds complicated. I know you've got a little piece of software on your website. It helps organisations just work their way through those questions, and then at the end it will spit out a DIAL rating. That's really key for me because that enables you to match your service to each customer's own particular requirements. And together that means that they're compliant with the GDPR certification scheme, which means compliant with law.
Great, thanks Steve.